My friends, I hope you'll forgive any audio snafus for today's interview. The current jungle hideout has paper-thin walls, questionable internet, it's a shaky web call between southern Thailand and Boston, and I'm recording it through the magic of audio hijack and the Discord app, which all seems strangely fitting for today's guest. This is a dude who graduated from Bard College with what he calls the world's most lucrative degree, philosophy. Co-founded a transmedia collective before it was even a term, service clients like GlaxoSmithKline, boo, while making avant-garde art and badass industrial rock, yay. Penned the Philip K. Dickian underground hit Join My Cult, worked on Disinfo's anthology Generation Hex, boosted the early ARG medium with mythology-heavy comics, podcasts, and websites, and even co-starred in the award-winning gonzo-mentory web series Clark, which was a thing that would have made Hunter S. Thompson's head tingle were it not filled with lead. Again, words like hijack and Discord just seemed right for a guy who can be editor-in-chief at Rebel News one month while corrupting the fragile minds of millennials with his psychedelic fiction the next. He's got a doomsday vault chock full of peyote, tattooed courtesans, and work past, present, and looming to chat about today. Bowie fans, stick the fuck around. But the first thing he must do is hop in the DeLorean with me and punch it back to 2005, Florida, MegaCon. That's where we first met and where the elder man gods were invoked with our now sacred prayer, cheeseburger, blowjob, 4 hours sleep.
Right.
Kittens and cats, buckle up tight and stay hydrated. James Curcio is on Buddha and the SLUT. James!
Hey, Brooke, it's good to be with you.
And you, my friend, this meeting of deranged minds is long overdue, so I am excited for this. How are you feeling?
Good.
So just to set the scene, I was touring the indie version of the BS DVD at some of the bigger cons, and I heard great things about MegaCon in Florida. Like, the people who came there were known to buy lots of swag and seemed less about normal comics, Western stuff, and sci-fi, and more about manga and anime stuff. And 2 of our voice actors were making an appearance there, and I think it was on the BS forums, the Saints forums, that I connected with a friend of yours who lived in the area and was hunting for booth space to show off a multimedia project. It was like a graphic novel thing that Neil Gaiman, Sandman, American Gods Neil Gaiman, he was involved with. Is that right?
It's Phosphorox. Yeah, it's Latin. I mean, it was a project I worked on a long time ago. It was one of those things that was like a good idea, and we got it into production and almost got it through. We were basically kind of pimping our kind of early release. We had Neil Gaiman on board as a creative consultant for it.
Well, of course he was. It does not hurt that he lived in the area back then and you guys had a
Mm-hmm.
total sex bomb spearheading the thing. Well, from what I remember, it was like an ambitious project. It was taking the whole fairy fae genre and bringing it out of antiquity with a modern spin. Probably, well, I know you guys probably had some S&M and mature themes too, since that seemed to be like, the scene back then. It was a myth for our times, born in the mists of legend.
Yeah, well, that's how mythology works. It's just recycling, and adding your own kind of style or aesthetic or whatever to it. So, yeah.
And that really is your jam, isn't it? Your passion for the whole idea, for mythology and the different stages and facets within the shape of it, the construct of it. It wasn't long after we met that you were focused on like essays and interviews and web stuff on all those mythological themes, like Mythos Media, right? How many years ago was that again?
Oh man, 10. Yeah, I think I started it around that time, maybe a year or 2 afterwards. The Mythos Media. Yeah.
Which begs the million-dollar question. Okay, here it comes. What's your mythology, James? That's why we're here today. I want to know your story so I can understand your obsession with like myth and philosophy and art and music and psychedelics and, well, even polyamory, which might need a whole podcast of its own. But how your story began, and I'm betting it's a good one because I can't imagine a mad genius like you was, just eating a sandwich one day and as the peanut butter sent me into my first anaphylactic shock, I asked myself, what does it all mean?
Well, I was going to say there's a million ways to answer that question, but at least that part of it is pretty easy. I've pretty much always known that. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly when, sort of the first inspiration happened. I could write it 10 different ways, which is kind of the whole point with like fiction and mythology is that, you can write a factual story, your life, in 10 different ways and be 10 different stories, but you're still basing it on the same source document. Yeah.
Maybe, but your path is, well, I think it's utterly unique. Otherwise, we could all tell our stories 10 different ways and eventually overlap enough that I could say, I'm David Lynch, and I'm an Eagle Scout, and apparently I like to put beetles in my underwear. Okay, no, so seriously, starting line, you, artist and philosopher king, your Big Bang. Go!
I would say, I mean, I mean, for me, honestly, it started. My story for myself was that I was going to be a scientist. Like in elementary school and middle school, I was really interested in, space travel, space exploration, all that sort of stuff. And I had a teacher who was, he'd actually been a runner-up for the Challenger. So, I mean, lucky for him, he didn't get in because he would have blown up. But
Jesus
anyways, he was a
Christ.
really interesting guy, and he, kind of got me even more interested in science. And then I got turned around with this kind of sideline thing happened with a math teacher who just pulled me off the honors track. And of course, it's like if I can't do that, then I want to do something completely different. So I started focusing in on art, and I think the thing that really set the hook, though, honestly, was my grandfather disowned me when I was 16. He asked me what I was going to do with my life. I'm like, I'm going to be an artist. He was like, No, you're
Are
not.
you fucking serious?
When he said that, yeah. But when he said that, I was like, all right, uh, you know, now I have to do that. You know,
Okay, well that is mythic. Like it's like one of those old fairy tales.
uh huh.
Uh, Father, I have chosen to devote my life to finding the last unicorn. How dare you engage in such foolishness? It brings shame to our home. Besmirching the family name, besmirch! I'm, I'm telling you, that's some Hans Christian Andersen shit.
And he actually he had an inheritance put aside for me, and I didn't get it because of that answer. So that factors right into that, like Hans Christian Andersen sort of thing.
Jesus,
Yeah.
I was just going overboard for effect, but you weren't kidding. Like, for this blasphemy I curse you and your children and your children's children to the end of time. Thanks, Grandpa.
Yeah.
Well, clearly he was stuck in his perception of you. He wanted to see you as this like rational and respectable contributor to society, as a capital S scientist, not abandoning that all for some namby-pamby, airy-fairy, artsy crap, right?
Yeah, it's just that, I mean, my interest in it was always more in the sort of speculative, which is essentially creative, side of it anyways. I mean, I was all right at the kind of fundamentals, math and whatnot, but my interest was more in kind of pushing the boundaries in theoretical physics and that sort of thing. So my going into philosophy wasn't really that much of a leap. But there's always been this sort of tension for me between sort of this analytical sort of taking the thing apart and figuring out what it is, or more and more looking at it as a whole, but still trying to figure out what it is, and creating, and I kind of ping pong back and forth. So that has been true throughout my life. There's been sort of a kind of dichotomy between those two things. So, but I wouldn't say I abandoned either or one of them. Yeah.
No, I totally get it. Not many people know this, but I was like this math prodigy up until about 15 or 16 years old. Like,
Hmm.
no, seriously, I was provincially and nationally ranked. Competitions and ribbons and all those chess club bitches, right?
Yeah.
And well, then I don't even know how to explain it. Something happened. I don't know what it was, like hormonal or something in the water or an extra special after school beating. But it was like overnight, this switch flipped in my head, and I ended up almost completely losing my affinity for left brain stuff, like science and calculations and order. I was like, I don't know, it was just this chaos in my head, and suddenly I was just creative. It was more like art and music and definitely writing. So it sounds like you had a shift that was at least somewhat similar, if not maybe as sudden.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea, like any clues as to what may have triggered that for you?
I would say
Drugs.
it's
It was
yeah,
drugs.
drugs. They facilitated. I was already on that path. Actually, my mom's girlfriend, well, at the time girlfriend, now wife, introduced me to Nietzsche, and my girlfriend's mother at the same time introduced me to Hegel. And this was like I was like 15 or 16, um, and I was kind of searching for answers anyways. And I'm not sure if they kind of threw it my way, like I don't know, just look at this or whatever. I mean, my girlfriend's mother had a master's or a PhD, I forget which, in philosophy, so they had some background in it also. But it kind of helped channel. I mean, Nietzsche in particular has a certain appeal to like adolescent boys.
Well, of course, you're in this desperate bug-eyed quest for power, and along comes talk of the Ubermensch. I want to be an
Yeah,
Ubermensch.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and then if you're brave, you keep reading and you learn that God is dead. And then you either go the emo route or the blackout drunk bro route. It makes total sense from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's an undercurrent in our culture that maybe people aren't thinking about consciously, but I mean, the effects of, yeah, it kind of permeates everything. Us all grasping for meaning and grasping for some sort of purpose because we don't have that sort of sense of a bedrock, in divinity or whatever it is that we previously found it in.
Well, speaking of bedrock, of your foundation. Something you just said caught my attention, and I didn't want to let it slide because I think it might have played a key role in your formative self. So it's a personal question, if that's okay.
Hmm.
You said, my mom's girlfriend. So you're saying that your mother was, in fact, gay.
Yes. Yeah.
And is it safe to assume that you were raised primarily by women, like from the beginning?
I mean, pretty much most of my childhood. My dad left when I was 4. Um, and and talking about mythological influences, I mean, I think this might be one of the many reasons why Dionysus and Krishna both appeal to me, and especially Dionysus.
Okay, but for those of us not steeped in the minutiae of ancient Greece, what do you see as the connective tissue with the whole "I have two moms" children's book you must have gotten for your birthday?
Well, in the myth of him, that's usually there's various versions, obviously, but he was raised by the Meliae and by the nymphs. His father was the one who bore him. He was actually, it says in this text, he was born from his father's thigh, which I guess if you don't have a uterus, you use your thigh. His father was Zeus.
Hey man, Zeus can do anything. You want lightning? Shazam! You want a baby? Look, an easy bake oven in my bearded thigh.
Yeah, just shove the baby in there. It's fine. It'll come out in 9 months. It'll be fine.
Give or take a childhood obsession with bulls, but I digress. Go on.
So yeah, he was raised by nymphs and had this sort of kind of charmed childhood that became kind of challenged later on, and that's a kind of reoccurring myth that I guess appealed to me. But I encountered Dionysus through Nietzsche first, which is a link back to that. Nietzsche's kind of obsession with Apollo and Dionysus was the first part of his career when he was a professor at Basel. So I actually encountered Dionysus not through bullfinches or sort of the Greek mythic angle at first. It was more through Nietzsche talking about this guy over and over again. Like, who the hell is Dionysus? Is not just some, I mean, everyone kind of vaguely knows of Dionysus as like something to do with wine, but that's usually the extent of it.
Says the man who can't say no to a good party, epic indulgence, and drunken orgying.
Yeah, no.
Uh-huh. Like I said, your path has been unique. But I'm thinking all that feminine energy did play a major role in shaping your worldview, maybe your creative output, probably your approach to intimate relationships. Or, no, okay, seriously, but is that totally off base and the whole time this was just normal for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, first off, it was normal for me because it was my experience. But most of the women that I was being raised by were, lesbians in the '80s. So I don't want to paint the picture of it being like incredibly like yin energy necessarily. Um,
Like flannel and buzzed hair, at least on the top of their heads, and a certain lumberjane charm.
Sometimes it depends on which girlfriend you're talking about.
All right, all right. No harm, no foul. I can roll with it because I'm the last person to consult for information on '80s lesbian philosophers. But what was
Yes.
your view of yourself in the skin you were in? Like, one of these things is not like the other, you and your mom's. What did
Yeah.
being a boy mean to you? It's not like I'm advocating a traditional upbringing by any means, but
But I mean, but I definitely got a different experience of kind of gender roles. And I got picked on a lot as a young kid by boys. Really, my first experience with men was being kind of assaulted all the time by them, and kind of being like, why is this a thing? Like, why are they picking on me? I'm just reading a book over here, like, because I was an only child also, so I was already in my head.
oh, I hear you, brother. Only child in a hockey town, and I had a thing for Dungeons and Dragons and musicals. So much joy. Please continue.
And I only was in retrospect years later that I looked back and said, oh, it's because I wasn't like performing gender the way they expected me to, or whatever, But um,
Hey man, I think I'm totally with Robin Williams on that one. For most guys, like when you're cursed with all that teen testosterone, you only have two settings: fuck it or kill it. And it feels like you're gonna go to war.
Heart of Darkness kind of shit. Yeah.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies, son. Hi, my name is Piggy, and I have the conch, and I think we should work as a sympathetic collective and respect each other's needs as individuals while serving the greater good. And is that a boulder falling on me? Oh, fuck! That was seriously a fate for boys like us who carried themselves with even a glimmer of femininity back then.
Right.
And without a doubt, those early fears in confronting my masculine and feminine sides, that shaped who I am now as an artist, like as a friend, a lover, a human being. I imagine the search for identity would have been even more intense for you at that time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's still a factor in kind of who I am today, I think.
Did you push back against it at some point? Like, were you like, screw you, moms, plural, and get all hard ass and start to swagger and peacock and I guess kind of like reflect what you were seeing at school in order to achieve the prime directive, which, being a boy and heterosexual was, of course, girls?
That's not how it. I mean, that's not how it worked for me. But the way it worked for me, I think. I mean, I'm just kind of speculating retroactively, but like when I was a young kid, my mom's was an art therapist, and she had a friend, that she worked with, and at the point that I was like 9 or so, and I didn't really have many friends at that point. So she introduced me to her coworker's daughter, and we became best friends. And I used to go over there and like sleep over all the time. We had slumber parties, and then we started getting older. She would invite her other girlfriends over. So kind of, I mean, I don't know. My first experience of becoming like, kind of exploring, sexuality in that way, but like not like in a childish way, not like in a, like having sex, but there's childhood flirtations and make out parties and
I see. Forge the genuine bond of friendship which young girls first perceive as non threatening, which leads inevitably to truth dare, double dare, doctor in the closet, second base phase.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, so it wasn't like a performance. It wasn't me like being like, I never did the strutting kind of thing. It's more like, these are my people, and I also want to sleep with them.
Yeah, find the tribe, fuck the tribe. That's just how it is, and I've tried to explain this to girls and women throughout my life. Your brain is pretty much poisoned by testosterone at that point, at the sexual peak of your teens. And it seems like your entire awareness and identity revolves around the biological imperative of getting someone to accept your seed. Like, and almost every other guy around you is going through the same thing, and you can see and feel and like literally smell that craziness in the air.
Right. Shit gets crazy at that point. Yeah.
And since you took the road least traveled after high school, as opposed to like pumping gas or becoming a banker, I'm guessing there's, some more shit that set you on this path.
Well, I had a pretty big existential crisis towards the end of high school, where I wound up being hospitalized. This was I don't know, maybe about a year after my grandfather did the whole like disowning thing, and so it was probably percolating in my mind still in some ways because it was a big factor for me. My grandfather was really my only male role model, even though as a child I knew he wasn't like a very good role model. Um, right.
So that creates a serious like internal conflict, a conflict of belief, identity, perception. Okay, and I always say this to people, like conflict creates change, and the bigger the conflict, the bigger the change, which that kind of maps out the hero's journey for a person, like there's your grandfather's rejection. Was that your belly of the whale in the Campbellian journey? It's like a big conflict pushing you out of the known world in a quest for transformation. Like, does that make sense?
No, I mean, I think innately I just had this really strong need to understand, what it means that I'm aware and what my place is like in the world. But even beyond that, like, you know, like what the fuck to life and to existence in general. It really was just an existential crisis. Didn't have any sort of.
Yeah, but it's still a part of your narrative. Like, it's an inciting incident to some degree, isn't it? Like a catalyst that set you on a crash course for some really serious, like, epic change.
I mean, I was linking it to my grandfather disowning me and that thing, but at the same time, thinking back on it, and I don't I don't think there was like. I mean, I know you're looking for a narrative cause, in the sense of like a story.
Okay. Then let's backtrack for a minute. You just said before that this is like an existential crisis, that you had an existential crisis, and that you ended up hospitalized. We'll get to the creative connections with that soon, but right now, can you tell me how that happened?
All right, yeah, that I can definitely do. I was part of a kind of group of friends that had formed, kind of like like the outsiders club. Kind of gravitated together. We started experimenting with the occult, which was completely spontaneous. It wasn't. I mean, there were at the time there was a sort of movement of bookstores stocking occult books in the 90s. So we did start getting that stuff pretty quickly. But even before that, we just start going out into the woods and like doing these sort of impromptu rituals. And
Okay, hold on just a goddamn minute. You're telling me you were dealing with your grandfather shit, and then you joined up with some other misfit teens, all full of angst and hormone outbursts, and you dove headfirst into occult rituals, and you went into the woods and attempted to summon the old gods in some like dead clearing with bags of animal blood, while you were almost likely enough on acid at the time, enough acid to like down a bear which led you to hospitalization, and you don't think there's a narrative catalyst or personal myth happening.
All right, fair point. Yeah, so we started like we did an experiment of sorts, which also kind of happened, sort of developed on its own, but where we recognized that we had very distinct, different personas, and that for most of us it was three. So all of us kind of we picked three different names, and each of those had a different sort of alchemical or elemental kind of like a fire, air, water, or whatever. And then from that started feeding those personas and playing them. But and part of this is I think it's just a natural thing when you're an adolescent to try to sort of figure out who you are by playing different roles. Except we were doing it like in some sort of like freakish next level kind of way. But anyways, the result of that experiment was a mental breakdown. The steps between theirs I can't really say exactly, but you reach a point where if you're playing these roles, who am I anyway? You know.
Yeah, but you're already brimming with the pressures of adolescence. Your body's changing, your mind's changing, you're swinging back and forth between hating yourself and then these like crazy levels of egocentricity. It's like shaking up a cheap bottle of champagne that someone left out in the sun. It's going to pop.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that set me off was actually pretty typical. It was my girlfriend breaking up with me. That's very, normal thing. You actually mentioned that as one of the typical triggers for an existential crisis. That was certainly one of the factors.
Well, yeah, because again, our biological imperative is completely overriding any rational thought at that time. And, our identity, like as men, as boys, our identity revolves around, like, if you're straight, the approval of and desire for you as a sexual being from the opposite sex. So you got this bolster that's supporting you, like for your fragile identity, yanked out from under you in your teens after it was established as part of your personality's through line. Like,
Yeah.
okay, the things coming to mind right now is like you've got Lucy yanking the football away from Charlie Brown the first time, and all of a sudden it makes complete sense that Charles M. Schultz had a girl doing that to your sad sack boy.
Yeah,
Seriously,
pretty good.
At that age, a breakup, like from a girl-induced breakup by design is one of the most traumatic experiences for a young man.
And still, I mean, at 40 or 37 or whatever, it's still just as crippling. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the wicked grandfather and the aggro schoolboys and the forest rituals and more drugs and all of a sudden a stopping of sex and then the mental hospital. Okay, and so you went to the hospital. Did they pull like a typical excited states of America and like pump you full of meds or what?
Yeah, well, the medication was the step before the hospital. Actually, when I started kind of getting depressed and spinning out, they put me on Prozac, and that's what sent me really over the final edge because on Prozac I couldn't sleep, and so pretty quickly it went from being like super depressed to like I'm going to feed my blood to the trees so the elder gods can understand me. So it was just like, all right,
Prozac.
time for the hospital. Yeah,
Prozac, that's some nasty shit. I have never envied anyone who's been through that. But the sleep thing I get. Okay, here's a tangent. I go off on these, so bear with me because there's a point. In third year university, there was a small group of us who came up with this brilliant idea. Hey, all of our finals are on the same week, so let's just stay awake the whole time. If you slept, you threw your money in the pot, and the winner was the last one with their eyes open. So my grades were safe, and like an idiot, I was like, okay, let's do this. And what was it, 98 hours? 98 hours later, I'm crawling to my ex's dorm room and begging for protection from the black-eyed demon that stepped through a portal in the showers and was coming to eat my soul. Good times. There was that line from Twin Peaks where Agent Cooper's talking to his recorder. It was something like, Diane, as we learned from American GIs during the Korean War, sleep deprivation is a one-way ticket to temporary psychosis. And I'm working on a 3-day jag. And I did 4. I'm guessing you were probably like about the same or a little longer, right?
yeah, about a week. Yeah, yeah,
I'm telling you, stuff like that changes a man.
yeah.
But for us, like creative types, for us weirdos, these events, at least I feel that they're fuel for the fire, which I think brings us to your infamous first book, Join My Cult.
Yeah, I mean, Join My Cult was basically a fictional, like a quote unquote fictionalized account of of what happened.
I remember you asking me to read it, and I finally sat down over a rainy week and dove in. And like anyone with a brain and a little bit of empathy couldn't help but think, Christ, like money down, dollars to donuts, this shit is autobiographical. And you went to these like deep places, these dark places. There were like some big ideas. I gave you a quote when you asked for one, how it reminded me a bit of like Philip K. Dick's more personal mindfucks.
It was satirical too. I was kind of making fun of myself a little bit also.
Which is a tricky line to walk, to navigate. I'm guilty of it. When you mine your own experience for a narrative, for a story, there's always the danger of some serious wankitude. You know, like, this is me and my experience, and everyone can learn from me and my profound insights and revelations.
Well, that was the first draft was the first draft was definitely the egocentric, I'm so smart, blah blah blah. But then as I started rewriting it, it became more and more sort of like, recognizing the, and I started getting a little older. I think that helped a little bit too. But
And that's the kicker, because that vital perspective only comes with time, right?
yeah.
Well, time and maybe drugs. Because I was a late bloomer in the psychonaut scene, like exploring those inner frontiers and tearing down the walls of perception, as they say. And I had to take it in small stages, like really careful and methodical, because I was scared to shit. It wasn't like I just dove right into ayahuasca and San Pedro like a fucking madman. But then I read Join My Cult, and it was clear that here was a guy who wasn't afraid to take a walk on the wild side. Was that a conscious decision on your part, like from early on, to be a psychonaut, to do that thing?
Just about. I mean, actually, the first thing was, okay, I'm going to take LSD, because what the hell. So that was the first step. But then after that, it was like, because my first trip was entirely like staring at a mirror and like being like, I'm looking at myself. But then if I'm looking at the sort of, infinite mirror regress sort of thing, if you're aware of yourself, then what's aware of that awareness? What's aware of that awareness? And it's, turtles all the way down.
While the rest of us simple humans are taking small tokes for our first buzz and then maybe graduating to a gram of chocolate-covered shrooms so we can, like, make light trails with our hands and go, whoa, look at the trees, man. They're like inside-out lungs, and they make our air. It's all connected, man. While we're doing that, you're in the advanced class staring at the infinite and collapsing the nature of self. And let me guess, how old were you again for that first trip?
Uh, 17. I mean, this is the thing though, with just, me, how I am. Like, I'm really good at what most people consider advanced, and I'm really bad at what most people consider like, pretty obvious, like classic.
Well, like Joss Whedon says, that's Mr. Buffy the Vampire Slayer to you, and yes, I am a fan, so sue me. He said that, like, all powers, like magic, have a price. Or maybe it's like D&D, where if one stat is maxed out, like your strength, another is retarded. And I was reading about high functioning autistics, because I happen to know so many. Ooh, wow, aren't I lucky? And one of their dominant traits, besides a lack of awareness of the emotions of others, like problems with empathy, is a pronounced clumsiness, like problems navigating the physical world.
Absent-minded professor. Yeah.
And not to get too personal again, but I've known you long enough to witness some consistent challenges you've had with your health and mobility and pain management.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I'm not like Stephen Hawking or anything, but it's still, there's, there's some element of that for sure.
Okay, so you're never going to play professional football, but the pendulum swung pretty far in the other direction. Philosophy major.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah. And of course, again, it was, how is this practical? And me being like, practical? I don't understand what is practical.
Well, okay, so you get into college and you go in this academic direction, but now you're out of the protective cocoon of your youth and the two moms and the only child thing and the forest hijinks. That was a pun intended. Was it like sort of a culture shock for you to go from that world, the nurtured, protected world, to being surrounded by, sex, drugs, rock and roll, post-secondary life? Like, how did that feel, especially like in the States? Frat bros and everything and automatic weapons and shit.
I mean, I was living on campus, but I was going to, like I think you mentioned before, Bard College, which is a relatively small liberal arts school. I mean, I had a class called Dionysus and the Rites of Ecstasy. I mean, it was in that regard, it was the right school for me. But, very avant-garde.
Of course. You can have your business and marketing and computer science degrees. I'll be over here exploring the secrets of higher thought. And for our midterm project, we'll all drop in and record ourselves masturbating in the dark. Please.
Yep.
Hey, man, it's a clear and shining path to job security. 2-pump vanilla soy latte, please, extra foam, and could you sprinkle the meaning of life on top? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a fate that meets many Bard graduates after they get their degree, for sure.
But you somehow avoided that fate, like the worst of it, and that's got to be tied to your ambitions, right? Like for creativity, for your art. So back to the book. You were still writing it at that time, doing drafts, or?
But I actually started Join My Cult when I was in college, and you mentioned about that. The process of writing Join My Cult. That started, I think my sophomore year in college.
Oh, so you sat on it for a while, like after the hospital experience. Did you take notes, do an outline, or?
I'd written the first draft of it, like I mentioned, right after everything happened. But then looking back on it, it was, it was pretentious and awful in all the worst ways. I'd never written a book before.
Yeah, well, you'd never done it before, but it didn't stop you. Like, most of us are paralyzed with this fear of looking dumb, making mistakes, and you pulled the classically, the metaphorical thumb out of your ass and you wrote the fucking thing. Like, that's a big deal. And again, I keep asking, but I'm just curious about development of different people. Like, how old were you when it really started to take shape?
19, I think.
19, of course. With this holy sacrament, I parted the veil and I've seen the light. We are sheep and fools. Let me guide you through the wasteland of the self. Yeah.
I definitely had some of that, some measure of it. I was reading a lot of Robert Anton Wilson, who I don't know if anyone's familiar with him nowadays, but Discordianism, Illuminati.
Oh, Wilson and the Illuminati trilogy, man. Like pre-internet, reading that stuff, and Philip K. Dick, and some McKenna, and maybe even Van Daniken, the whole Chariot to the Gods, aliens made our society. You can like almost draw a straight line right to Alex Jones. Like he's their bloated Texan offspring. As freedom.
Yeah, it's like a twisted like love child, but it's totally twisted and warped. I mean, like Robert Anton Wilson wouldn't have been, I think, pro most of Alex Jones's spiel, especially these days.
I don't know, man. Interdimensional child molesters is all I'm saying. Hey, man, when you boil his shit stew right down, I think he's still maybe 40 or 50% accurate. That beats the weatherman most days. But anyway, it's okay. Well, it's clear you had these influences in this line of thinking, and the hospital experience is like a major part of the catalyst. So then,
I mean, and then I just started writing. I mean, and a lot of the process was, people say like, oh, you can write books about drugs, but when you're actually writing the book, no one actually writes a book on mushrooms. Apparently they do because I did. So part of the reason why it's such a gibberish is because a great deal of it was written like completely ripped off my ass. That period. I mean, that's not how I write anymore. My entire process changed.
but you're serious. You wrote the majority of Join My Cult while you were tripping balls.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas the rest of us will be drooling in a padded cell at that point. Somehow you finished your main draft and still in your teens.
yeah. That's accurate. Yeah.
That's more than accurate. That's otherworldly. That's what that is. And okay, and then
And so when I wanted to get it published, that took a couple years for me to write it and rewrite it and whatever. But around my, I think, senior year when I graduated, I started writing to New Falcon, who's one of the publishers who put out some of Robert Anton Wilson's books. And I was like, well, I was influenced by Bob, so why not go to them? And I did, and I kind of talked to them for like a year, and they kept giving me the like, oh, maybe we're interested in this draft, but we'll see. There we no like actual agreement with anything. I just kept on, kept on them. I was pretty dogged at the time, and eventually I got a deal.
that's ballsy, man. Going to the publisher of one of your heroes and being all squeaky wheel until they buckle and they put their eyes on it, and then they realize the value of it. You couldn't do that today.
It was a good trend. I hit a good transition period, but just for a moment, where the internet had gotten big enough. When the book came out, it was 2004. When the internet had gotten big enough that you could kind of, indie promote stuff online, and it would actually reach anyone, as opposed to like the Usenet days. But it would hit some people, but it wasn't like this corporate, like, nightmare that it is today.
I am right there with you. We made that original version, like the first big project, Saints. We made that original one from 2000 to 2003, and it was right in that sweet spot of timing when most of North America was still just using dial-up and editorial contacts at major papers and magazines and review agencies. They were just getting established online. Like maybe we should have a contact page, or should I put my email address for everyone to see? I spend at least a third of my week tracking down these contacts and sending story pitches and then getting our fans to spam them. So fuck, half the big stories we got from like USA Today and Wired and stuff, it was essentially them relenting after months or like some of them even years, chipping away at the old media resolve they had. And again, you can't do that now.
Yep. Yeah, I just hit. I mean, like, I kind of was. It was like already a transition point, but the first, I don't know, first year or so, for a book of its kind, it sold relatively well. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, Da Vinci Code or anything like that. But I mean, consider it was like a completely counterculture, satirical novel about '90s occultism. I mean, it's not something that, but it kind of caught on with a certain group of people, and there were people in Brazil, there were people in Russia, there were people all over the place who were contacting me who wanted to become agents, basically within the structure that's presented in the book. You're like an agent of the Mother Hive Brain Syndicates, sort of, you know, thing. I mean, it's hard to explain exactly.
Well, it is, but it isn't. Like, when I read it, I immediately saw some parallels with the kind of horse lover fat PK dick mad protagonist sort of stuff, and a little nod to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and definitely some of the punk mindfuckery of the Invisibles, like Grant Morrison's thing.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think yeah, that's probably the easiest way of explaining it, a little bit like Grant Morrison's Invisibles. Although at that point I hadn't read the Invisibles, and so it was definitely one of those things.
Great minds think alike, man. Like, the older I get as an artist, you start to sense these waves coming, like the zeitgeist, and whether you're set up to catch them or not. You could see that with Morrison stuff and like his whole chaos magic shtick, like which he probably stole from Mr. Grand Wizard himself, Alan Moore.
Their feud, endless feud, yeah.
You call that chaos magic, you ponce? I'm going to shove my beard and my 3 wives up your bald Scottish arse. Like, Moore's definitely a curmudgeon, but he's a badass.
Yep.
Now, at the same time, suddenly I'm seeing this vision of like Morrison and Moore and you and myself. It's like there's a connection here. Morrison was like this bald rock star writer who manifests things that he thinks he does with chaos magics, and he does not skimp on those heroic doses of psychedelics. And you're cut from a pretty similar cloth. Is that the secret to the universe? Just like, get all shorn and join a band and trip balls till your dreams come true?
Just shave your head, take a base, you'll wind up in Tangiers with William Burroughs. It's just that fast. It just happens. Yeah.
Yeah, but you've actually taken that route. Like, Morrison has spoken a lot about how he saw pretty immediate changes in his life bubble up after writing himself as a protagonist in something like Invisibles, and he said he had to be careful about it in the future, like he was casting a spell. So you cast yours, like the book, and how did your life change after?
Did it change? Not right away.
Well, it kind of did, because then you went kind of corporate, right? Like clients and shit, the whole professional thing.
I co-founded a media company. I mean, I think I saw that you could reach people through media, and that media was really the way to do quote unquote magic. Not sitting in front of an altar necessarily. I mean, you can do that too. So yes, co-founding a media company was definitely the next step. Which was kind of a difficult experience in some ways, because that's when I first started encountering the real world, right? Where it's like, how do you fund this thing?
Exactly. How do you get in bed with the lizard people and still maintain your core and the drive to make art?
Yep. And how do we kind of conceive it as a Robin Hood sort of scheme in a sense. I mean, not really stealing, but like, working for day by day for the corporations, and then by night, like funding our plots and plans, right? And then how do you balance those things? And that's kind of what ultimately kind of made me leave the company, was this sort of being unable to balance that. And a lot of the partners more and more were like, this stuff isn't making us money, and the stuff that is making us money, let's focus on that. And I was kind of like, okay, well, bye. So then I was out to LA to be in a band for a while, because that's what you do, right?
No, that's what you do. Everyone else either sticks with the job or backpacks through Europe or gets baked and surfs a trust fund, and then they all end up back in their mom's basement. You are not like other people, man. See? You seem so sweet and gentle and level-headed, but you went down there to thrash it up and likely start another cult.
No, we didn't become Tool or anything.
And you were making the leap to LA at that time to be in the band, like from Boston, right?
New York, actually.
So the scene is so played, and this corporate whore thing is just making me tired. Fuck this scene. Someone fetch my scarf and a fair trade Americano. I am bound for California to shred it at the Troubadour. Oh yes, and I've taken your stash and your women, Toodles.
I mean, I can't say that's inaccurate. Yeah.
Okay, and I can say that that's pretty much your catchphrase for this interview today. I can't say that's inaccurate. You've said it before, haven't you?
Once in a while.
All right, well, even New York to LA, that's still a pretty massive cultural shift. I've felt that experience even with the Canadian version of Toronto to Vancouver. How did you take it at the time? Like, was it easy in stride, or was there some degree of, what have I gotten myself into?
It was a huge culture shock, and I didn't expect it because I'd heard, everyone hears the stories of like how LA is. It won't be that different,
But you were wrong.
but I was wrong. So there's definitely a huge culture shock. I actually, the first year I was there, I kind of was just like, because so we were playing shows in like LA, but we were actually technically in Orange County, which is a slightly, I mean, it is, kind of the way it's portrayed in the shows. Um, and the people were very, kind of, I mean, I met some freaks there ultimately, thankfully, but like the average person there is very sort of focused on presentation and what kind of car do you have and how many cars are in the lot and that sort of thing.
So what's the time frame you're talking about? Like I was down there every 6 weeks for 2 years, and you never know, maybe we cross paths at one of those epic bashes.
2002 to like 3 or 4 to 4, yeah.
Yeah, around the same time. Like after the Sundance win, it was a couple of years of pitches and agent bullshit, and I couldn't believe, it was this whole city of people. Well, I wouldn't call them people; I'd call them vampires because it's LA. But just this entire culture driven by an engine of, "Hi there, what can you do for me?" Like, just it's all about image and perception management and just taking.
Yeah, I mean, for the first year I was there, I was saying I didn't really like change out of my pajamas. I was like, I'm going to wear pajamas from now on because big middle finger. I was playing shows in pajamas, having party. We were having house parties, and I'm still like, people kept asking me if I was a porn director, so I kept kind of rolling with it and being like, yeah, totally.
Fuck. And somehow you managed your way through it still, like even though it was this totally fucked up scene and you were still young, right?
Early 20s. Yeah.
That's crazy. Like you had an outlet for all these growing pains for this creative energy, and that all that stuff had been building up in the first book, and now you were in a place that was really different. Like, was there any friction there for you, like with your creative side and the way that you lived and your routine as a result of that change?
That's probably true. I mean, I was having a hard time sort of managing the like, how am I going to keep a day job sort of thing because I've never been very good at that for very long.
But that's where the philosophy degree comes in. LA will always need educated baristas.
Yeah, I worked at a record store for a little while. I worked at like tried to work at a coffee shop, but like every time, they would kind of be like, "Okay, you're nice. You didn't do anything exactly wrong, but I'm going to ask you not to come back," kind of thing. So,
Fuck them. That just gives you more time to rock and roll, Like all the debauchery, and for the love of God, please tell me that you were having like a seething orgy of coke and groupies and glow in the dark sex toys. I need to live vicariously, man.
it might have been. I mean, I'm not going to speculate, but it might have been.
KG, but I'll accept that answer.
But at the same time, we had a lot of people coming off of, well, at the time, like LiveJournal. We had a spare room, and then we had several large closets. And so we oftentimes had people, I mean, really strangers, come and, visit us, come to shows or whatever, help us out in the band, kind of be like impromptu short-term roadies. And they would start out sleeping in the closets. And then if they like kind of like really vibed with everyone else, maybe they would wind up in the room for a little while or whatever. I mean, it was an interesting time.
Yeah, air quotes, interesting. I think I definitely see where this stuff is kind of headed. So you were living the lifestyle full time for a couple of years.
Yeah, like 3 years, something like that. Yeah.
So you got this industrial rock, funhouse mirror, sexy time, strangers in closets, counterculture thing. That's kind of mythic in its own, and that begs the obvious question, if I can now ask it.
Sure.
How much was the next work, Party at the World's End, based on that period of time in LA?
Really directly, because when the band broke up, I was already our band was called Babylon, and it was based on Aleister Crowley's kind of concept of the horror Babylon, and this is a whole kind of tangent talking about Jack Parsons and whatnot. But we had this sort of mythological scheme for the band. When the band broke up, I had already been thinking along those lines, and I'm like, I want to write a book that's based on this mythology and based on sort of life experience, but not about it and not like truthful, not quite in the same way, just join my cult. So that's when I started Party at the World's End, which really took me like 10 years to finish. I mean, I wrote and rewrote that book so goddamn many times. I finally got it.
So if you had to give a summary of the story, which you do because I'm asking, how would you describe it? Give me the elevator pitch.
Well, I'm actually really bad at that. And you know this because I remember in 2005, when we met in MegaCon, you saw me trying to sell my books to people at the table. And you were like, you're like fucking Billy Corgan there. Like, despite all my rage,
I'm still just a rat in a cage.
Yeah.
I remember singing that at you. I remember thinking like you were a guy who was like clearly in love with your work, but there was this complete disconnect when it came to like pimping it to people.
It's that right. Like, go out there and talk to the artist, because every time I go out and talk to the artist, talk to other producers, I'm like bam, bam, bam. But then when it's like, "What's your book about?" I'm like, "Eh." But nevertheless, I will give it a shot.
No pressure. Well, seriously, just think back. Remember our talk at the booth. It's all about the Buddhist mirror thing, right? I was there to push you to embrace your passion and get fired up and whip your dick out when it came to your stuff, to your work. And then you helped me by showing me how to reflect more and be humble and not be afraid to tell personal stories. And all this while trumpeting our shared need for cheeseburgers and blowjobs and extra sleep. It was a breakthrough.
And we're both right.
Yes, we were. But okay, I'm thinking about MegaCon again, so off topic. I just don't want to miss this stuff. It's all flooding back now. MegaCon, Florida. We were staying out in the suburbs at your friend's house, Faria, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Man, I got to tell you, I don't know if you remember me telling you, but I arrived at the Orlando airport and I was met by, the hostess, by Anna and her friend Kai, and they're in costume. And all I could think was, what have I gotten myself into? And then I got to the house and very quickly realized that I had ended up in the Twilight Zone
Yeah,
and the island of misfit toys in the Twilight Zone.
yeah, yeah. I definitely fit in.
And then Anna leads me into the back room, like into her bedroom where I would be crashing for the week. And I remember thinking, what is going to happen? And then I saw the shelf lined with strap ons and all manner of sex gadgetry. But thank the gods, it was meeting you, actually, that made me chill out. I was in my go harder, more phase. I was so driven. And you were this sweet, soft spoken Zen dude who, like, wrote freaky books. And I was just like, okay, it's going to be all right, Brooke. James is here. It's going to be all right.
Yeah, I'm pretty fire of water, and you're pretty water of fire, so it works out.
It was just such a different scene for me, man. Like, not only had I done really only a couple of cons at that point, but I was a complete virgin when it came to the whole, fetish and BDSM scene, which all you guys seem to be in, pun intended.
We took Sirach Lofton to a. Were you there when we took Sirach Lofton to a dungeon?
Oh, I was there. I just didn't go to the dungeon with him.
That was fun. It was his first dungeon trip. He was the one who played Jake Sisko on DS9.
No, I remember. I remember. And when Anna, the queen, realized that I was not going to indulge her darker whims during my stay, well, let's just say the queen found herself another knight to joust with.
Plan B worked.
And he was down for the role. He was the Dark Knight. I'm sure she thought she had traded up. But I wouldn't have come there without her reaching out to me, and she made the whole thing happen. And because of it, we now have a bromance.
Yeah, she is really great. Yeah, good facilitator.
But did you notice how many times I snuck off for those like long, insane conversations with her friend Kai? That girl, she was fucking brilliant. And that was probably my first really deep dive with someone who had Asperger's, the maxed out science and art levels of brain and common sense non-existent. But she could really dance on a table.
Yep. I miss Kai.
Yeah, well, thinking back, I don't just miss Kai. I miss the whole thing. It was a great time because the booth we had, it was close to the artist alley on the show floor. And there were all these talented people who were committed to making art. And then there was, then there were you guys pimping your project. And even the actors who showed up as special guests, like fucking John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard and Smallville. And like the chicks from Buffy I kept creeping on. These are all career artists. And there's something magical about that. And also you could see like the obsession in them for what they did. You don't take a path like that if you're sane.
No, definitely not. I mean, it's definitely a sort of obsession, and it has to be, because otherwise, I mean, maybe in art school or whatever, you'll make your art, but like it's too hard otherwise to keep going unless it really has a piece of you, you know.
I'm starting to know, man. It's a lifestyle, clearly. It's definitely a commitment. But all right, so back to you. Book 2, Party at the World's End.
Okay.
So tell me the story. Unpack the myth of it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this one was kind of gestated in my mind when I was working with Anna and the rest of the Phosphorox team. It's its own thing, but we were working with this idea of, kind of, what if there were people who believed that they were demigods? At least in Party at the World's End, it's ambiguous. There's someone who believes that she's Lilith. There's someone who believes that he's Dionysus, but they start out in a mental hospital, and there's that kind of question running throughout all of it is, the way it's presented, they could very well actually be incarnations of these sort of archetypal energies, or they could be just fucking insane, and either of those possibilities are fully on the table. um, and they start a band together, and that's when shit goes crazy. America starts falling apart around them. So it's kind of a story about the
It.
collapse of the American Empire, but from within the sort of context of the counterculture.
Okay, so wait a minute. Quick question.
Yeah.
From the description you just gave, like the demigods and archetypes in modern America as it falls apart around them, that's got more than a little bit of American Gods ring in it. Am I an asshole for thinking that?
Although I hadn't read American Gods at that point, even working with Neil Gaiman.
Again, you are ahead of your time. You'd been thinking about this for years and then working with Gaiman for a while, and then his book came out in 2001, but you hadn't even read it yet.
I hadn't gotten to it. I read it later. Yeah. I had read Sandman, so that was certainly an influence in a way.
Sandman's brilliant off the board. That was a massive influence on me. But, here you are with parallels to Morrison in the first book and some more to Gaiman. And like them, these aren't just one-shots. You're hoping to build a series from this stuff.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I'm working on the second book now.
See, and that's the thing with the current climate of entertainment. You got genre films and golden age of TV. They're adapting everything now. Fuck, they're even doing Xanth now. Finally coming around to the fact that there might actually be an audience for smart and schlocky and downright weird stuff. And, of course we want our archetypes too, but they should exist as more than ads for Happy Meals. I think that we're in a time where everyone's recognizing the need to world build and service the arcs, the growth of these characters, and in big, bold visual ways, like with budgets. And I remember reading Party at the World's End and thinking, this would be a great flick or maybe even a series.
I originally, it was actually like, well, okay, so I first wrote a draft of it as a novel, but then I had some connections with a small film company that was looking for scripts to option. So I rewrote it as a script. We pitched it to them as a script. It got optioned, as oftentimes happens. Then it sat on the shelf for 2 years, and eventually the option expired. At which point I took that script and rewrote the script back into a novel. So that's the process it kind of went through, and why it took so long.
And you were also playing around with page layouts and concept art and some panels and stuff for a while. I think I remember that.
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to kind of take the aesthetic of like early Vertigo graphic novels, but do it as a novel as opposed to as a graphic novel. Yeah.
And while you were working on this for this extended time, you also had some other stuff on the go. Was it like fiction or nonfiction? I remember a bit of both.
I worked on a bunch of anthologies. Actually, Narrative Machines, which I'm working on now, is the first nonfiction book that I'm just writing on my own. I did work on some anthologies after that point, like The Eminence of Myth, Apocalyptic Imaginary, a lot of different anthologies.
Okay, and I want to talk about that stuff, but before I forget, another brain fart or download, I need to also salute your work as a great manufacturer of memes. Seriously, you post some clever political and philosophical stuff. It's like really sharp and funny, and I always look forward to seeing it in my feed.
I mean, I keep joking. I should write to Facebook and be like, you guys should pay me, because I've gotten more compliments lately on my Facebook feed than I have in my books, which is like a pro and con kind of thing, But
people have to focus and use their imaginations and make an actual effort for more than a few minutes at once. Books is hard, man.
Yeah.
But you can swipe memes on the toilet. Swipe as you wipe. Shit. Yeah, literally. Oh man, that just came into my... God, I must be on drugs today. Maybe it's just talking to you, but... okay, another tangent, but do you remember the website Hot or Not from like the Wild West days of the WWW, like back when we were first working?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's kind of vaguely, but yeah, I remember it existing. Yeah.
Okay, so Hot or Not, I remember it was a site. I first saw it. I had a feeling that things were going to change on the web at that moment. It was this lowest common denominator thing, but I could completely see its appeal and how it would affect how audiences interacted with stuff. Like, okay, you'd arrive at the site and you choose girls or guys as your interest or as your focus, and then a picture comes up, like a real world picture of a girl or of a guy, and then you rate them 1 to 10, hot or not. And that was their metric. It became this like huge thing for a while.
Sure.
But there was like a backlash. It was pretty fast. Within a couple of months, my artist on Saints, who had this knack for finding the grossest fucking things on the internet, he sends me this link one morning at the studio, and I open it up. Rate my poo. You know, seriously, people were like taking pictures of their dumps and posting them for 1 to 10 ratings. It must have started as a joke, and I saw it as a backlash to the whole beauty and objectification thing. But then you'd read the comment threads that went on forever about the size and the texture and the symmetry of some dude's shit. It's a fucking dump.
Hmm.
This is people, man. The internet has revealed to us the dominant mindset of our potential audience.
I mean, and there was like something awful, and there was a lot of stuff around that time that was kind of feeding off of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was, but you took a different path. I knew I was going to take one too. Like after we met, you sent me links to some stuff you were working on. I knew that, yeah, we're using the net in a different way. Your stuff was multimedia too, and music stuff.
I worked on a bunch of music projects. I mean, it was kind of simultaneous with other things, but I worked on a studio project called Some Still Despair in the Prozac Nation.
But you weren't just making music, if I remember correctly. You were doing some pretty novel things in the making of it, how you produced it, the songs.
Yeah, I basically was like, I knew musicians all over the US. And so sometimes I would kind of visit their home studios and work with them for a week or so and like get totally, whatever, go out on whatever tangent we could, musically or otherwise, and, just kind of dig in and then take that source audio and I might share it with a guitarist I know out in LA or share it with a musician, a vocalist I know in Russia. They lay down tracks, send them back to me, just doing that back and forth for a couple years and kind of like permutating, stuff. Sometimes there are some tracks where it's like we started out with, kind of an underlying grid, drum tracks, bass, whatever. And then eventually I'd pull those away and replace them with other drum tracks or mix them together, have that sort of fun with it. So it was very much a kind of pig face, kind of mashup.
So, just for listeners, this is kind of like the stuff people do now on YouTube a lot, these remote collaborations, especially with music. But you were doing this a decade plus ago.
Yeah, it's 2003 is when we started it and we, released it in 2005.
Again, I say, ahead of your time.
Yes, oftentimes.
It's fucking bonkers. Like, folks have said that about me with maybe a bit of the story in Saints, but you seem to be ahead of the curve in most of your work.
I mean, we were basically podcasting back in 2001.
What?
We didn't call it that.
It doesn't matter. You were putting down long form audio content online for free back then.
I mean, the thing we were doing is kind of like an adjunct to Some Still Despair and Prozac Nation, which is, we kind of created these sort of mashups, except for the podcasting was bedtime stories with the Antichrist, mixing in audio theater and like short interviews.
Coded with messages to summon the Dark Lord, right?
Possibly.
Well, I remember following that stuff, or at least listening to some of it, and it was all in this kind of end of post Napster where everyone was just sharing audio for the sake of diving in and experiencing what was out there. Not just pop shit or payola radio, but like nobody knew how to monetize this new frontier yet.
We got, I mean, we didn't, of course, it wasn't a money thing, but for a while we got a lot of downloads though. I teamed up with Grey Lodge Podcasting, which is when that was like 2005, it was a little later, but and they had like kind of this underground audience, but it was still fairly large because they were releasing a lot of occult texts and other texts and stuff in these sort of packets. And so I started putting, our podcasts in with their stuff because I knew Joe through New Falcon, Joseph Matheny. We did a lot of transmedia stuff. So we started working together and I started kind of slipping our stuff into their feeds, with his permission. And sometimes, he'd be like, yeah, so that got 30,000 downloads last week. She's like, Jesus Christ.
Those are decent numbers even for today.
Which back then, of course, I mean, was a lot, and it wasn't a money thing.
We're going to have to pimp some of this stuff if it's still lying around.
Sure.
No, I'm serious. You pick a piece or a tune, and I'll tack it on at the end after the closing theme song.
It's a hard call. I've been in a lot of audio projects.
You've done a lot of projects, period. I would say that's the definition of prolific. And yes, I would say that brings us to your current crop of stuff. Let's focus on the original fiction first. This, if I remember the name, Tales from When I Had a Face.
Tales from When I Had a Face. Yeah, that's right. Which is a follow-up to Party at the World's End. Although I'm writing them to stand on their own. I mean, part of that is because I might find a different publisher for it, and I don't want to be entirely tied to the first thing. But they're definitely thematically connected and overlap in a lot of ways. But they also can stand on their own in the narrative. It's kind of, I mean, it's kind of like the Marvel, cinematic universe where you could watch Iron Man or you could watch, one of the other movies, and they do stand on their own, especially the earlier ones. But they are tied together at the same time.
Okay, so set the stage for us.
This one's basically about a girl who grows up, only child. She's the daughter of a Siberian shaman who is a refugee. Um, and kind of her experience of being torn between the traditional culture that her grandmother is kind of feeding her, and her grandmother, of course, is trying to raise um, to become like she is, or to kind of live for her because she's kind of broken. Um, and on the other hand, um, she's also living in the modern world. She's living in New York City. So, so it's like kind of being pulled in two directions. And then when her grandmother dies, it's sort of that's when the narrative really kind of begins. So yeah, that's that story. And I'm working with two other artists on it.
So you've been taking your time and being patient with them because artists are fragile creatures and they're snowflakes and butterflies. Trust me, I know. You keep nudging them towards what you want with color and shape and layout and character design, but somehow make them feel like it was their idea and the raw muse itself is just coming through their hands.
Stream logic.
Or I could just stick pins on my fucking eyes and nails in my dick hole and chug some liquid plumber because sometimes that might be easier than a goddamn comic project. Just saying. But seriously, I've learned this about you. You have the patience of a saint. I've worked with you on some stuff. Even the cover image for this here podcast you helped me out with. Thank you. And you put up with my flashes of high maintenance and aggro bullshit like it's ain't no thing. At the same time, I know deep down, especially with the stuff you make and your music, I know you got some beast in you, man. I just want to know when it comes out. Where does it come out?
Yeah, it's like I save all of that energy for when I do like metal. Like metal is like the one time where I'm like, like performance of masculinity. Let's do this, fucking shredding.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I know a lot of really smart, quiet dudes who just let it fly when they perform.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the musicians I know who play that kind of music are very mellow backstage. I mean, like, I used to hang out with Curse from Philco Cult. He plays some other Grim Fairies, and he's like off stage, he's like totally chill and mellow. On stage, he's a fucking madman.
My love for you is ticking clock berserker. Would you like to suck my cock berserker? I had to. Kevin Smith, fuck you. Okay, I got to steer the ship back in the right way. I got to head to the home stretch now. So let's talk quickly about your nonfiction stuff that's coming out soon. For the first one, can you tell me the deal about this one, Narrative Machines?
Yeah. Narrative Machines is kind of me playing, exploring my whole street philosopher self. I mean, I don't have a PhD. I have a lot of friends who do, and kind of I riff with them about a lot of the stuff that I bring up in the book, and they kind of help me keep it on track. But it's basically looking at mythology and culture in modern culture, and how mythology affects our lives, and how it's affecting politically, the rise of Trumpism, the alt right. I talk about chaos magic and its kind of effects in a cultural sense, memes, but not just memes in the sense of like pictures that you share on the internet. That's like the tip of the iceberg. The actual idea of memetics being like kind of how culture spreads itself. And that raises a lot of kind of troublesome issues, like the issue of appropriation and power. So I kind of deal with all of that in there, and it's been kind of much more. I mean, really, if we're going to get into that, it's more kind of post-structuralist, but then being critical of post-structuralism also. Post-structuralist.
So what you're saying is this ain't exactly for the Rust Belt. So if you had to peg your audience, the potential readers for this, who would it be?
Narrative Machines is being written specifically. Honestly, I'm writing because it's what I want to write. It's not as much of a commercial venture, but I'm writing it sort of for the grad school dropout types. Like I'm writing it for people who kind of are somewhat familiar with this material because I could spend a book explaining kind of like what's been written, postmodernism like Deleuze or Foucault, but I'm kind of assuming that the people have read or can at least Google something they don't recognize, in the book.
Okay. I just had a vision of someone reading this thing on their tablet and then Googling a term on their phone at the same time. You were going to wind up part of this whole multi-screen phenomenon, you trendy philosopher king. Who'd have thunk it?
I mean, I did that. I mean, one of the books really was an influence for me in writing this is Manuel Delanda's Thousand Years of Nonlinear History. And that book, I mean, it's fucking dense, and there's every single like sentence. There's at least one word or one concept that I have no idea what that is. So I went through the first time I read it and highlighted everything I didn't know, and then I went through and Googled all of it, and started piecing it together. That's how we learn this stuff. But you have to have the sort of passion to sort of want to pick it apart like that.
What always comes back to passion, right? I think that passion brings us back to something that I teased in the intro too. We're passionate for music, for stories, whatever, but this is a passion of yours for a long time because I think that you feel kinship with him. So you're going to be looking at the mythic aspects of the late, great David Bowie. This is the top secret other thing you've been working on, yeah?
The other book I'm working on, even though it's still academic, because it's kind of based around Bowie and the issue of the mask. Masks factor heavily into a lot of Bowie's past work. But it kind of occurred, the concept for this book occurred to me right after he died. I've been a fan of Bowie's work for a long time, but I saw Black Star and video and whatever like the day before he died, and then the day he died, I saw Lazarus right before I found out that he died, and it just kind of blew my mind. Like,
yeah, again, seriously uncanny to the point where it almost felt constructed, like you could just dust for the architect's fingerprint.
As you look into it, it wasn't quite as consciously conceived as it might seem. It's like, I'm dying, here is my death tome, but you can read it that way. And there's a way where you could read a lot of Bowie's work that way. Like if he died right after 5 years, it'd be like, oh my God,
But that's part of what makes him timeless. That's what makes him endure.
Yes.
It's the music and the style and the look and the poetry and his movement and the vision he had for even technology. There's that great interview about him talking about the internet. He was just like a decade ahead or more. Even his acting, it's like you're witnessing something not altogether human, which I'm sure is probably the response he was going for.
There is David Bowie, who's basically an enigma. I mean, David Bowie, the Enigma, also played other characters like Ziggy Stardust, but David Bowie is already somewhat fictional. David Jones was his real name. We don't know him. I mean, his friends and his relatives and whatnot know David Jones, but we don't. That's not the person that we know.
Exactly. He was a moving target.
He was good at jumping back and forth between the sort of intentional pretensions of the art world and pop culture. And that was one of his great gifts, I think, was being able to kind of mix those streams in a way that wind up just, continually being sort of, for the most part anyways, pop successes, where it's, very common that you mix, sort of, I mean, some of his stuff is so out there when you look at it. I mean, like Outside or Low, or, I mean, Station to Station, like all this stuff is like, you actually look at, kind of what he was thinking at the time and what he was producing. It's out there stuff. It's not like it's not pop at all, but it pretends to be,
And the whole time he was probably watching us and thinking, "You're all a bunch of bloody wankers."
Total wankers. Yeah.
Okay, my friend. I think we should wrap things up on that note. Escape our wanker fate. Time to pimp your shit. Links?
Sure. Well, mythosmedia.net has most of or at least quite a few of the projects that I've worked on and projects that I've brought in or collaborated with people on. It's got albums, it's got books. So mythosmedia.net's a good place to check out. Modernmythology.net has more kind of analytical kind of philosophy, cultural musings. It's basically a web magazine, or I guess they call it a blog these days, right?
Blog, tomato, whatever gets the message across. I hope that chat did this for some of the listeners. For me, it was long overdue, like I said. And hopefully the next one can be in the flesh. That's where I think the real magic happens.
I prefer that, yeah.
Well, I might be in your neck of the woods later in the year. Halifax and Montreal ain't so far from Boston, sir.
I'm walking distance to the airport, so you can just walk.
No, I will. If I can make the planets align, we will enjoy good food and a potent drink, and we shall chat to the wee hours. It'll also give me a chance to thank you in person for inspiring me, because your work, I think it's brave, and you really stepped on the artist path and showed me it was possible. Seriously, man, so much respect.
That's the best payoff there is. I mean, that's the main reason why I do it, is because I've gotten letters from people that say, you changed my life with your work. And that's better than the $4 you might get from a book. So thank you.
My pleasure. You can repay me with strong coffee and a promise of a podcast where you school me in the whole polyamory thing. Okay? Yeah, next time, educate me. Deal?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So thanks for listening, kids. This has been Buddha and the Slut with special guest author, musician, philosopher, and vulvic priest James Curcio. Stay tuned after the theme song for a little metal goodness from the man himself. Until next week, keep it in your pants and use that juice to dance, son. Word.
Slaves rebuke their masters. The extent of our endeavors made absolutely clear. The wheels are turning, Babylon keeps burning. Time has come to consecrate the end.
What I am telling you is that the most plausible single explanation for this nightmare, namely the apocalyptic vision of a criminally insane charismatic cult leader who was hell-bent on bringing about this infernal nightmare.
Open your heart, close your mind. He is here in the flesh. Open your heart, close your mind. He is here in the flesh. Open your heart, close your mind. He is here. Conquerors have breached the gates, no orders will be called. The night has reached its blackest pitch, nothing left to keep them stalled. Animal in the flesh. Animal, he's out there. Antagonists are rushing in, the towers start to fall. Those who believe ancient scripture may hear a trumpet call. Animal in the flesh. Animal, he's out there. The battle rages my soul. I never even existed.